If you guys notice, compliance never gets less, never gets easier. What are your views on compliance in the modern world as it is today?
We legitimately do have a good way to build really order out of what feels like chaos for so many organizations.
The word compliance overhead, when I hear that word, I hear duplication of effort. If someone's doing the same control twice, that's objectively a bad thing. I think it would be completely irresponsible of me to say that, just using a platform is going to get you through an audit. Absolutely not. There's so many ways you can fail these things.
And at a certain point, every organization realizes this is not practical. This is not even possible.
You're adding days and days to a competitive process where hours can actually be the difference between whether you win the business or not.
So what are the consequences of my action? How might my action cause downstream impacts, of which I'm not currently aware?
We take the security of our customer data very seriously, which you usually hear. And it's like, well, you've had a breach. Please don't say that.
Please don't say that. Let's be honest.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Razorwire. Now, today we're going to take a slightly shift to the side on our spotlights on technology. And we're going to do a bit of a spotlight on compliance. Specifically, we're going to talk about compliance in general, how to meet it, how to maintain it, and a variety of different subject matters related to it and where we think compliance is going, including basically a number of different technologies and services. So we have CTEM from Razorthorn's perspective. We have GRC tooling and compliance tracking with Drata. And we also have audit and maintaining audits for various different types of compliance from A-LIGN. It's going to be an interesting conversation. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. So in order to discuss the important aspects of compliance and streamlining that compliance journey, I have sought long and far to try to find some of the greatest people in this industry for us to communicate and have a chat about compliance, the problems of compliance, some of the places we think compliance are going, and compliance in general. I'd like to introduce you to Martin and Patrick. Now, Martin, since you are right next to me on the screen, and the first one I quickly saw, do you want to kind of introduce yourself, who you are, where you come from?
Yes, what an introduction. Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here with yourself and Patrick today. I am Drata's Audit Alliance Manager here in London. So basically managing the interface between what we do at Drata, which is provide a software solution for compliance, which I'm sure we'll touch on a bit, being the interface between that and our auditors. We always keep church and state separate so that the ultimate report that is delivered to a customer that is then passed on to their regulators, to their stakeholders on their compliance is worth something, there's actual integrity behind that. In a previous life, I was a SOC 2, SOC 1 auditor at PwC.
Oh dear.
And for my sins, I now, yes, oh dear is right. Very fun at parties. Looking forward to getting stuck into what we have on the agenda today.
Fantastic. Welcome, Martin. Now, Patrick, come on. Tell us who you are. Where are you from?
Yes. My name is Patrick Sullivan. I serve as VP of Strategy and Innovation at A-LIGN, a third-party cybersecurity and compliance and a test firm. We're headquartered in the U.S., but we have offices globally at this point. And really, my focus is just to ensure that as technologies continue to emerge and markets continue to change, that we as a compliance firm are doing due diligence in order to ensure that our customer base in the market in general is making good decisions about how to build and then execute on their compliance strategies. I will say up front, our partnership with Drata is one that's been hugely important to us. So Martin, it's great to see you. Great to see you again, man. Always enjoy these conversations with you.
So likewise, it won't be the last time we're on a podcast together, Patrick, I'm sure.
Well, it's an important subject matter. I mean, let's face it. I mean, what a piece of fun compliance is. I think, everybody has a bit of a love-hate relationship with compliance. I mean, let's be frank.
We might as well be.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's be honest. Compliance is a really important part of the business world today. It doesn't really matter whether it's cybersecurity or whether it's legislation from government or what it may well be. Pretty much most organizations these days have to do some form of compliance. Now, obviously, we all specialize predominantly in kind of like that cybersecurity, security compliance, be it PCI DSS. I've been a QSA myself for many, many years, be it ISO 27001, be it DORA, be it NIS2, be it High Trust, be it HIPAA. I mean, it's endless levels of compliance. And obviously, Martin, you also mentioned SOC 2. And I think, it's important for, if you're watching this, sometimes the question comes, well, why do we have so much compliance? Well, the reason we have a lot of good compliance, especially security compliance, is because predominantly people in the past weren't really doing it, or they weren't really doing it in a kind of standard fashion that could be recognized by all. And when you have situations where you have a lot of breaches that are occurring, you'll tend to find that if compliance isn't there, it's going to quickly follow after one or two large breaches. That's the reason why we have PCI DSS, all that economic issues that came out, the wonderful world of e-commerce, which changed the way that we purchase things, but also changed the way that crime worked, So it's become vitally important. And the only other thing about compliance is, if you guys notice, compliance never gets less, never gets easier. It always gets maybe more complicated. Obviously, it gets refined. And I think one of the things that a lot of organizations have a challenge with, which is weirdly enough why we're here today, and the preamble will stop in a second, is that people's compliance journeys really need to be streamlined. You reach a certain size and you've really got to start being very, very careful about how you're managing it, how you're supporting it, how you're maintaining it, how you're recording it, obviously, from a Drata perspective, and then finally, how you're going to be reporting that to your final audit or your auditor or your auditing body or whoever that may well be. I mean, what are your views on compliance in the modern world as it is today?
As I think about compliance, I really do. So there's a saying that success leaves clues. And I think with compliance, what we see is that mature operation leaves clues. And those clues, depending on your need, depending on your focus, ultimately become the compliance frameworks that organizations or bodies expect adherents to conform to. You mentioned the PCI DSS. We know that we only have the DSS because cardholder data was treated in a very insecure and flippant manner for so many years. And so as a community, the PCI SSC said, look, we've got to do something different. We've got some known good best practices, successes that have left clues. Let's package those, and let's hold users that are processing, storing, or transmitting cardholder data to a little bit of a higher standard. Let's expect them to be more mature. And what I think you'll see across the board is largely that's what the compliance frameworks are intended to do. What I see the real issue is, and Martin, I think you likely see this as well, organizations are getting better about understanding that just because we have 30 different compliance standards that we're bound to, ultimately it's us and our context that's most important. And therefore, we have a chance to bring our vision and our perspective to bear as we implement these various standards. And we legitimately do have a good way to build really order out of what feels like chaos for so many organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you take a step back and go to that question, Jim, that you kind of posed, why does compliance exist in the first place? I think there's ultimately a benevolent goal set by the regulators or set by private markets of, trust and making sure that an end user, if we think about DORA, for example, that an end user of a financial service product is not harmed, can access their monies, can apply for a mortgage by the doings of the various actors in the supply chain that constitutes whatever it is they're purchasing, they're using. And I think this concept of compliance as a cost center, I get it. I get where it comes from. There is no direct, link. People who work in GRC compliance aren't directly selling, they aren't directly innovating. But in the same breath, it is actually a bit of a debate now whether, compliance can be seen as a revenue center. So maybe that's something we get into, but I think that is indicating a big shift in the mindset. Obviously, yes, there is a lot more of a burden that compliance is posing on us, but there are ways to look at it quite strategically, where obviously you still have to do the heavy lifting, But the way you do that heavy lifting, there's real ways that can benefit you from a commercial perspective.
And I'll be the first to say that to throw my name in the ring of compliance can absolutely be a source of value creation for organizations if approached correctly.
And also a protective one. I mean, let's face it, we're talking about information security, cybersecurity, however you want to term it, and compliance in that space is very much geared towards preventing breaches, preventing issues from occurring, stopping, say, let's use PCI DSS. We've used it as a few examples.
Please.
Preventing customers from experiencing the loss, and also obviously the card brands are in on that as well, because they don't want to finance that. And that's part of the reason, as you quite rightly pointed out, Patrick, why it even exists in the first place. I mean, they were all kind of in agreement, and it was one of the most interesting things actually when PCI DSS first came out that I've experienced in a while at the time. Anyway, and there's a lot more since, especially when you chuck AI into the mix. But let's move that off to one side. They all had their idea of what good security was, and it was interesting to see their Visa, Mastercard, and Amex get together for the first time ever, competing companies. Let's be honest. And actually agree, no, this is a problem for all of us. We all need to actually get on board with this, and we all need to do something to build some kind of legislation that can be the same for all. Not quite the same thing with DORA, but, all the EU states all agree that, supporting good security in the financed area, and obviously we've got NIS2 coming in, which is the critical services. And I know you guys over in the States, you've had your own challenges with kind of maintaining compliance in critical services as well, colonial pipeline. I mean, geez, could you tell us a bit over there in the States? Have you seen a lot more compliance coming up, or are you seeing a lot of the existing compliance from your neck of the woods kind of being upgraded, updated to a more kind of modern business world? Because let's face it, a lot of these compliance models change very slowly in comparison to how technology changes.
Yeah. So I would say, to your point with the PCI DSS versus NIS2, so it's important listeners understand that there really are two different compliance pressures. There's regulatory pressure, like we see with NIS2, the directive, and then there's market pressure, like we see with PCI. Though for those organizations that are handling cardholder data, that are processing as part of their core business, it doesn't feel optional. Compliance with the PCI DSS is still completely up to those individuals. There will be no regulatory punishment from not complying. You might not be able to do business, but at the end of the day, that is a market pressure. And so what we see in the States is largely market pressure driven standards tend to evolve more quickly than regulatory standards. A big example here in the States is HIPAA. I think it was 92, 96, the last time HIPAA saw any real material changes to the security standard. I think that will continue to be the case, aside from what we're seeing with state legislation around AI today. We are seeing a real uptick in not necessarily copycat legislation, but in many ways legislation that mirrors what the EU set forth, Martin, in the EU AI Act. We're seeing a lot of that same language make it into state legislation, and we're seeing more and more state legislation being signed into law, that is.
And you make a good point, actually. I'm going to hand over to Martin in a sec to get his view, because, one of the things you do see with a lot of compliance, be it legislation coming from governmental bodies or be it from kind of commercial contractual obligations, that kind of thing, is there's a lot of intermixing component parts, like having good information security policies, having good, kind of endpoint security. I mean, okay, the focus in a lot of those compliance obligations is different. So with PCI DSS, it's cardholder data, as you point out. Some are more generalized, some are very, very, very focused, like PCI or HIPAA or whatever. But when you actually read through it, a lot of the principles for a lot of those are very, very similar in a very, very interesting ways. And this is why it's useful to have somebody like Drata, a GRC tool, a compliance tool, something that can bind all of those together. Because there's a lot of companies out there that don't just have one regulation. They have, say, 3 or 4, or maybe they've got a supply chain and they've got to try and support it through the supply chain, which, let's face it, we're all having significant issues with at the moment. But Martin, I mean, you see it from a GRC tool perspective, a compliance tool perspective. Are you seeing more and more customers finding it challenging to maintain their kind of information sets? And then obviously they've got to communicate those to different auditors. Some of them are from the same company, some of them are not from the same company. What are you seeing from your angle before we deep dive into the world of compliance?
Broadly speaking, you'd break it into two different narratives. There's customers who approach us where SOC 2 is a requirement of a procurement process they're going through. They've never heard of it before. They're very entrepreneurial mindset. They might be a coder or someone who's set up a company before. They're told they need SOC 2, haven't a clue. The AICPA writes the SOC 2 guidance in a way that is rightly subject to interpretation. You can't have a one-size-fits-all, action-based, because then it'll just get misinterpreted or it doesn't fit a specific industry. So they come to us saying, how do we interpret this? How do we implement this? What support do you have for us? That's on kind of the, I suppose, smaller size company scale of things. As you move up, you get the problem, and Patrick alluded to this earlier, of 5, 6, 7 different frameworks, some which are only applicable to certain jurisdictions, some which are only applicable to certain products that we're making. And we have teams of GRC experts and legal experts to interpret the guidance, but how do we kind of put all this together in a way that makes business sense and really goes down the route of compliance being a value generator rather than a pure cost center? That's what we see a lot of. I think, when you talk about those multiple frameworks, the word compliance overhead, when I hear that word, I hear duplication of efforts. So compliance is it's an expense. Compliance is still a value add center within a business, but when you have compliance overheads, okay, now we're talking about inefficiencies within that process, which I fully agree with. I fully agree that if someone's doing the same control twice, that's objectively a bad thing. You only need to do it once and understand the different frameworks that is addressing. You need to do so robustly, but you don't need to do it twice. So I think that's where it gets quite interesting, is when you start to talk about, okay, maybe there are some inefficiencies within this grander scheme of things that do warrant being addressed, but that doesn't change the story about what we're doing is kind of value generating.
Totally unrelated example this weekend. So my kids all love streaming channels. We're Disney Plus, we're Paramount Plus, all the pluses. This weekend, just kind of thumbing through my credit card statement, I noticed that I had 2 different subscriptions to Disney Plus. I had evidently signed up on my Roku, and then I'd signed up directly through Disney. And so suddenly, for the same service, for the same value, I'm paying twice as much, and legitimately had no idea. What I think, and Martin, I'm not sure if you see this with your enterprises that you serve, but in those complex environments, I see so many instances where, in order to meet the intent of certain controls, for lack of a better word, certain capabilities to adhere to a standard, people have 30 Disney Plus subscriptions and they have no idea why. And so as auditors, we come in after the fact and we see this variation, we see this variability. And quite frankly, in some instances, that gives us pause for concerns because those different Disney Plus subscriptions might be saying different things, which paints a narrative that prompts professional skepticism, if that makes sense.
It's interesting, actually, because, we came here with a load of bullet points and I've just completely thrown those out the window as per usual. So let's just go for it. I mean, at the end of the day, Patrick, all an auditor really wants to see is that you're meeting the intent behind whatever standard it is or whatever compliance objective it is. And when you read them, there's plenty of similarities that the auditor can pick up on and go, look, I found it frustrating. I'm going to use my experience as QSA because it's a very focused standard, for instance. And when you read through it, there's a set of very good guidance. It's requirements if you need PCI. But if you look at it objectively from outside of the PCI stance, it's pretty standard stuff, isn't there? There's nothing dramatic. There's nothing frightening. And it's like, you go and you do an audit and they say, oh, yeah, we're doing this within the PCI environment. And it's like, okay, so you're doing log management in the PCI environment and you're doing regular checks on your logs. Obviously, PCI requires it daily, but, why aren't you applying that to the rest of your business? Because, that facilitates ISO. It's a standard thing. It's not difficult. And then, rather than doing it and I hate the checkbox thing, it ticks a box. And I think Martin's probably going to like this one. I don't like that because it doesn't show that you're doing good security for the sake of the intent of doing good security. And if you're recording it twice in two different areas, why the hell are you doing that when you can just use something like Drata to record it all? So when you bring the auditors in, and I've done audits for customers in the past where I've been there to do PCI, some the other fella or person is there to do the ISO side, and in one case, somebody else was there to do the SOC 2 side. And we're all there, and we're all actually gathering very similar information. I mean, I was more on the physical for the data center side, but the ISO guys were looking at all the other component parts, but they have a physical component to it. They're looking at exactly the same stuff that I am, just from a different context. And obviously SOC 2, again, very, very similar. And it's just like, this is the wonders of having, that compliance tool that does it. So when, A-LIGN send in the PCI auditor and the ISO auditor, you can actually make things a little bit cheaper for the customer by doing that, rather than doing it all separately and then getting all confused where your data sets sit, whose data set is for who, the ISO auditor wants proof, the PCI guy wants proof, and the SOC 2 person wants proof.
Yeah, and Jim, as I think about this, one of the things that we learned early on in this process as we scaled, and we've been growing explosively for the past 6-7 years. But one of the things that we've learned is that you absolutely have to leverage technology where it makes sense. So, when you think about the grand scheme of operations, it's always people, process, technology. In order to be effective, organizations have to build operations around those three things in the right mix. For assessor firms, we have to do the same thing. We are very, very proud of our people. We have legitimately some of the most knowledgeable experts in the world around these standards. And our process that we've refined over time is very, very mature. But without the right technology platform for evidence to live on, for us to interact with, it's not all for naught, but it definitely does not bring to bear for customers the level of efficiency that we would want for them. And so those platforms, and Martin, thank you, but those platforms like Drata are a game changer, not just for customers who are looking, again, to bring a little bit of order to the chaos they feel with all the evidence that they're trying to collect for various standards, but also to auditors. We have essentially a single pane of glass that we can make sense of the world that we're looking into, which is so incredibly powerful.
I think that's where there's quite a natural synergy between what we do at Drata and A-LIGN, in the sense that every framework which we have available in the platform is one that can be audited, can be assessed by A-LIGN. And that's why we preach that the partner ecosystem by itself, Drata, or if you want to do a SOC 2 framework just for a laugh, I think there's other things you need to worry about, but that's great. You can just use Drata. You need an auditor. You need someone to help you pen test or help kind of implement some of these things, which is why we always talk about the partner ecosystem. And one thing as well, from an ex-auditor perspective, it's like you said, Patrick, I think it would be completely irresponsible of me to say that, just using a platform is going to get you through an audit. Absolutely not. There's so many ways you can fail these things. But if I were to look at something, all else equal, two different businesses, one where they are adopting technology and they have a tool, I am going to start to think as an auditor, they've got a better means of communicating and tracking this data and making informed decisions based on risk because of the abundance of data that they have in front of them before I even get into kind of testing their controls. So there's that element to it as well when it comes to the technology.
Again, success leaves clues. And those organizations that have transitioned to this way of being show us that they're much more mature than the smaller organizations that are really just starting to piece things together. And everybody has a journey. Everyone has a walk. So there's no judgment in showing up where you are. Nonetheless, as organizations do really build the muscle of validating compliance, it just becomes a different thing for them. It really does.
I mean, not to mention the fact that it does make things not only easier for the auditor. I mean, gathering all of that information, storing it in one space, and if you're doing 2 or 3 audits consecutively, you do get audit blind. And I'm sure, Patrick, some of your auditors are the same. It's like,
yep.
They come to you after like 3 weeks worth of doing like one audit to do the next 3 weeks on another audit, and they're like, Patrick, I need some time away because, quite frankly, my brain feels like it's about to go completely insane because I don't remember who I'm auditing anymore because it's all.
And Jim, for what it's worth, I started out at A-LIGN as a QSA. And so with us, the burden at the time was We'd be on the road for a week doing an assessment. The next week, we'd write the ROC. And so we had a 2-week window, depending on the size. Of course, it would vary sometimes, but a 2-week window to do everything associated with this assessment. And it would start right back over again. So very much a Groundhog Day scenario. And after a point, everything looks the same. After a point, you become desensitized to the nuance of the environment that you're looking at. But again, there was a different time and a different place. I think we as a community have evolved, especially in the GRC space, to really make the process more straightforward for everyone involved, for the entire ecosystem.
But it's also easier if you know that a customer is using, a GRC tool that's known that because you know where to find everything. It's easier to do things. I mean, I've had and Patrick, if you've been a QSO, you've had this one, especially in the early days, where somebody sends you like several zip files with like 20 million logs in, and you're just sat there thinking, oh no, I've got to spend the next 2 weeks looking through 20 million bloody logs. I don't even know what the format is. I don't know whether it's all going to fail halfway download or whatever. Being given access to something that allows you to be able to look at it and go, right, okay, there we go. I'll start the long process now.
Yeah, I've got to do a regex search to see if they just send me cardholder data and all these log files they shipped over. Yeah, total madness. But,
I mean, the other good, about having a tool like Drata is obviously timely reviews. How do you prove that you've done your quarterly reviews? How do you prove you've done daily reviews? Or if you've offset it to somebody else, obviously with a lot of these tools, it's like a third party, involved. You've got to make sure that your third party is doing their job as well, because it's down to their compliance. But if there's an issue and it's not picked up by, you still have this obligation. And I do get a bit frustrated with the odd customer who turns around and says, we're gonna outsource everything for our compliance. It's like, why? You can't do that. There's a whole GRC component for a start that is your responsibility. You've got to get buy-in from management. You've got to get sign-off from management. And you see a lot of I can't even say the word. My lips have gotten tongue-tied, but
it's a big subject.
Getting the C-suite buy-in, getting the owner buy-in, getting the CEO buy-in, and getting them supported is becoming a significant component piece for any compliance obligation, no matter which one you look at. ISO, SOC, PCI, DORA. Management are the ones who are in charge of that, and they've got to sign off on it, and they damn well better make sure they're doing it right. How do they do that? Well, the compliance and risks teams need to be able to interact with their tool to put their reports in to say, yep, I went and had a look at that set of requirements that we deal with. I've also checked in with the third parties to make sure they're doing what they need to be doing. Here's my report. Load it up into the tool, and then it's done. We don't go hunting for it for 6 weeks. Nobody knew where they saved it. We don't, nobody ever read the report that got sent out, so nobody ever did anything about what was found. I think that's quite a significant requirement when it comes to making sure your audits are nice and clean. And of course, a nice clean audit means it's done efficiently and effective, which means you don't get extra costs down the side.
That's it. And Jim, one huge component that I think we're leaving out of this is the reason that most organizations do audit, at least those that are dealing with a market pressures, customer contractual pressure, and that most of those organizations are performing these assessments so that they can offer assurance to their customers, to their value chain, that they're doing the right things. And so historically, distribution of those assurance reports, those certifications, it's been just as clunky as the evidence collection you mentioned with PCI log files. But Martin, you guys have fundamentally changed that in the past couple of months with your acquisition of SafeBase. And I think that is something that is not talked about enough, about the value that Drata is bringing to the market through its trust center. I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal from, again, communicating to the market how assurance is actually being delivered.
That's exactly right. And I think that's where, if there ever is a debate about compliance being a cost center or a revenue center, I think SafeBase really changes that conversation massively, because from the studies we've done, everyone who's watching this, and I'm sure Jim and Patrick, your good selves, are familiar with the turgid nature of a security review, of DDQs, the amount of questions that you have to go through, and the momentum killing kind of nature that these have on any sales cycle. that's where it's obvious. And that's where, with SafeBase, you have a trust center, you have a way to communicate those assurances that you refer to, Patrick, quite seamlessly and in a way that is devoid of any manual tasks of handing reports over to people who want to read them, getting the NDA signed off. You're adding days and days to a competitive process where hours can actually be the difference between whether you win the business or not. So those kinds of things, I think, make it really obvious that, to an extent, you could argue that costs that go into compliance, perhaps it's actually marketing. You're creating a more marketable product, or is it R&D? Because now you have a product that is more appealing to a wider market. Is that not marketing? I think it really, in the past few years, it's started to become a lot more easy to understand. Yeah, there is real value. There is real revenue generating value in being compliant, despite the kind of old perception of compliance as just people with pocket protectors and all that, who love to read legislation before they go to bed and that kind of thing.
I don't know anybody who likes to read compliance before they go to bed. And I've been in this game for 25 years, and I wouldn't want to meet somebody like that. I'm sorry if any of you out there really enjoy doing that, but do get another book. Switch off for 5 minutes. It's important to remember, more often than not, and the way things are now, if you want to win the good business, the big business, you need to have a good level of provable level of security, especially in the service provider space where you're selling into governments or you're selling into other organizations. Maybe you've got a cloud, maybe you've got a SaaS platform, maybe you've got a PaaS platform. There's a million different options. I mean, you're talking to the man who remembers when, a server was in the actual on-site data center, and it took 4 of us to pick the sodding thing up because it was so large. And if you ever forgot to wear your steel toe cap boots, you run the risk of losing toes when the HP Pro Light lands on your foot. Nowadays, in the days of virtualization, everybody's gone third party and everything, and you can cost save dramatically by doing that and going to third parties. But geez, it's gotten way out of hand. I mean, let's move quickly forward in time. We've seen at Razorthorn quite a significant shift in attitude, and maybe it was kind of led by the AI piece a little bit, but I think a lot of legislation is now starting to find, and we're seeing it maybe in DORA because that's one of the more recent ones that's come out. And NIS2 kind of covers a large chunk of it, of kind of ongoing assurance. You've got your auditor comes in, you've got to pass your audit. Obviously, you can't be audited more than once a year or once every 3 years because it can get ridiculous, any more than that. But you still have to do your provable stuff. But how do you assure your security not only to your shareholders, but also to your auditor and also to record in, funnily enough, your GRC tool? To prove not only the return on investment to the security that you're putting in by meeting your compliance obligations, but also doing what the intent behind a lot of those compliance obligations are, which is being able to understand where you are from a security standpoint at any one particular time. I'm going to leave it at that and hand over to you guys because, I mean, Patrick, you've got a wide variety of auditors from various different disciplines who deal with this day to day and all the research that goes in behind. So let's start with you, and then we'll move on to Martin. Where do you think compliance is going right about now? What changes can you foresee in some of the updates that are coming down the line? Because, as you quite rightly pointed out, some governance and some compliance is really slow to change, but they do change, and when they change, they tend to change pretty dramatically. So what are you seeing down the line?
Yeah, so there are 2 major themes, and DORA and NIS2 are exemplars of these. First of all, civil liability. DORA and NIS2 plainly call out civil liability for the management bodies to maintain conformity to those standards. That's something I think more and more will be part of the conversation as we recognize that management bodies need skin in the game to actually take some of these things seriously. The second is a growing need to recognize and then validate third-party risk management. Again, DORA and NIS2 are huge on this in ensuring that our vendors are treated as part of the overall security process. which is absolutely incredible. And so to that end, what we have proposed and what we absolutely believe in is using what we already know works. As an example, ISO 27001 through its information security management system. The nature of any ISO management system is that it's intended to be scoped and context applied in such a way that you build this management system specifically for the context of your organization.
Mm-hmm.
If and when there are external pressures that need to be accounted for, we simply extend the scope and we extend our statement of applicability. That is the controls that we bring to bear, that we manage through the management system. And we operationalize that and continue to grow and improve over time. And so specifically with DORA NIS 2, with a lot of the other regulations and directives that we're seeing driven out of the EU, ISO 27001 with its ISMS as a base makes a ton of sense as a starting point to then extend out and meet the needs of those external obligations. With it, you have a system in place that can be externally certified, externally validated by a third-party auditor, much like A-LIGN, and you have built in the processes and practices you need to actually report to the notified bodies for DORA NIS 2. Not as much the EU AI Act, that becomes a little bit different management system that we see people pivoting from. But I see organizations trying to get back to first principles as we're trying to minimize the den of voices that are asking us to implement specific controls. So I think those would be the big trends that I'm seeing right now. Martin, I'm not sure about you, man.
What are your customers asking for?
There's a kind of wide range of asks and a wide range of different regulated industries that we deal with. But what I would like to follow on from what you were kind of alluding to a bit earlier is this concept of point in time versus continuous compliance, and this reasonable assurance versus kind of absolute assurance. I think, back to my days as an auditor in PwC, the reports that we issue are reasonable assurance. We have no reason, given the samples that we've tested, to assume that any material deficiencies are present in the system and that users of the system can expect the same for this period of time. I think the independent nature of an auditor and the expertise that they have means that there is no better asset than a SOC 2 to really state for this period of time, things were working in a way that they can be relied on for the system to produce reliable results and to be secure, whatever the flavor of SOC 2 report may be. And then you have this kind of push-pull between, okay, that report has been issued and it's the best possible way that we can get assurance over it. But auditors will be very clear. A SOC 2 is not an insurance policy. A lot of cybersecurity insurance policies, the underwriters won't pay out if they are to believe that the attack was led by a state, or it was a state-sponsored attack, a state-backed attack. They won't pay out. So, SOC 2 is an incredible asset. It's the most important asset that you can have when it comes to communicating trust. But you are on your own after that. The responsibility is on you to continuously monitor and protect that surface area and consume information as close as possible to the source time of that information to make the best informed decisions. And I think that's where tools come into play, in my opinion, a lot, because the manual alternative is characterized by, it might take hours or a day or two to get the information that the risk committee is going to use to make an informed decision on. And by the time they've made that informed decision, it's already stale. So minimizing that lag as much as possible and enabling the organization to be as proactive and informed as possible is kind of the best practice after you've gone through your SOC 2 and you've gotten that invaluable report. You want to keep doing this. And that's why, auditors, absolute assurance is still kind of a theoretical concept where you test 100% of everything that has ever happened in an organization. I don't think it's reasonable to try and approach that. But a combination of a tool and a solid SOC 2 report from a reputable auditor like A-LIGN, followed by activities that continuously keep going to the gym, keep going to the doctor, keeping your finger on the pulse is, in my view, the best case scenario, the best practice that we would offer up to customers who ask us about this.
And Jim, and Martin, to play off that a little bit, Jim, I think about, you mentioned this earlier, from the DSS, the need to evaluate alarms daily, alerts daily. I forget which language it is in the DSS. There was a time that organizations felt that they could do this without a SIM or a SOAR tool.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, every organization realizes this is not practical. This is not even possible without bringing technology in to leverage automation in some way, shape, or form to help us meet the intent of this particular criteria. And I think we're seeing the same thing, Martin, as it relates to the GRC platform itself. Just the recognition that if we are to do things in such a way that we're staying on top of them, the way that we believe we should, we have to rely on this tool to be successful.
I mean, with the conversations I've been having with our customers when we're doing the consulting and when we're sitting down and we're chatting to them about their needs and their requirements, as well as monitoring the changes in compliance that I'm seeing, I'm definitely seeing a more threat-led, assurance-led kind of new world that seems to be emerging. I mean, pen testing. Let's take pen testing. I mean, this is a reason why I'm here to talk. Pen testing. It was for many, many years. It's been a snapshot in time thing. Let's just say in June you have your pen test and you spend 2 or 3 weeks with people crawling around the external infrastructure and your networks and maybe your web apps or whatever you're getting tested done, and then eventually they produce the report and boom, you get your report and there's a whole load of vulnerabilities in there. And you go, okay, cool, we got these vulnerabilities, we need to fix them. Here are a group of them are going to take sort of like maybe a week or two, and here's a few quick wins we can get now, and then we'll have the retest. PCI, ISO, all of them require some level of assurance. The problem we have is that's not enough anymore. Your pen test in June is great, but it's not indicative for the rest of the year of the state of the infrastructure that you have. You're seeing all these emerging requirements coming out for constant ongoing assurance. I mean, you saw it with PCI DSS with quarterly reviews, for instance, now for a hell of a lot of stuff that you didn't require in the earlier versions of it, which rather tells me that the reason you're getting that is because, they were still having issues. Now, you speak to them and they say, breaches don't happen to people at PCI compliance. So let's be honest, you do. Not necessarily in the PCI components, I've got to say that so nobody comes and shoots me from the QSA Council, but there are always problems. And if you've got like a big e-commerce platform that you're managing, or something that needs to be consistently on and ongoing, gets consistent updates from the development or from just natural upgrading, updates, whatever, it does introduce vulnerabilities that you might not find for another year or half a year. Some people are now turning to biannual pen testing rather than annual pen testing because they don't want to wait another year to find that they've got vulnerabilities or to have a breach in that time. So the reason we created a C10 product, which raises edge, I'm going to just put it out there, was to facilitate that corner of the compliance world that seems to be emerging, to make sure that people are aware that when a vulnerability gets introduced, it is found within a reasonable timescale and not an entire year or once every 6 months. And we're seeing a lot more people going down that route, especially with AI. People are panicking about AI. Well, you look at the rate of change with that. I didn't really want to mention AI, but I'm going to. We've got new AI legislation coming out saying you must be aware at any time of any risks to any platform that is interacting or housing an AI, because we can't afford for some miscreants to get in and make it go horribly, horribly wrong if it's doing a lot of important things. So how are you going to do that? You can't just have annual pen tests. That's not going to facilitate anything. And obviously legislation coming out is going to be like, that's not enough anymore. Well, I mean, do you see the same thing, or am I talking total hogwash?
Man, I'll say I do see across standards and across regulation, I do see a drive toward continuous monitoring. Lots of different contexts, lots of different ways. As an example, ISO 42001, the AI management system, the AIMS, the clauses for all ISO management systems are the same. Clause 9 and 10 are about measurement and monitoring. So we've always got to be measuring something, and we've always got to be monitoring to ensure that this plan, do, check, act, this Deming loop is executed continuously, so that we can know where we're falling down, where we need to apply corrective feedback, reinforcing feedback, whatever the case may be. In addition, to bring this back to the DSS and pen testing, remember the language was pen testing annually or upon significant change. The upon significant change written into so many things these days, particularly as it relates to impact assessments associated with AI. And so more and more we see, regardless of the domain that we're focusing on, be it security, privacy, governance, whatever, we're seeing more and more there's this recognition that we always have to be watching, we always have to be evaluating, and we always have to be taking some action to ensure that we're continuing to mature the way that we hope to mature.
I could see them actually just adding to that, removing the significant piece from that. So it's like, a pen test or after any change.
The crazy thing, ISO just released standard 42005. It's their standard on AI impact assessments. And so they acknowledge that, the trigger for an impact assessment will vary depending on organization. Generally, there are two types. There are event-based triggers. So something happened, something changed. Or there's organizational rhythms, basic timing triggers. We do this every 6 months, we do it every quarter, whatever the case may be. Specifically for high-risk systems, it's written into the standard that you should do an impact assessment when evaluating the change, and then an impact assessment after implementing the change to validate that what you thought would happen when you made the change is actually still the case after the fact. So they're doing double duty, double coverage to ensure that people are really thinking about this. What are the consequences of my action? How might my action cause downstream impacts, of which I'm not currently aware?
Yeah, no, really interesting what you were saying there. And it made me think, I don't think continuous assurance is a substitute for point-in-time assurance, nor vice versa. I think the two things, they both have to exist. I think the best example, and it's kind of where we are as a society, everything is so information-driven. If you can control the speed at which you receive accurate information, consume it, and make decisions off the back of it, absolutely you should. I think there's also, you've got to acknowledge PCI DSS QSAs or SOC 2 AICPAs or ISO certification bodies. The purpose they serve is it's an independent look in and a kicking of the tires, which there is no substitute for. And I think you need to complement that with continuous assurance after the fact. And it's like, I don't know if you've heard of these devices, these Zoe devices. So people who have diabetes, they can constantly check in. You can constantly check in on your blood sugar. You're not going to take that and never go to your doctor. You always need the two, but the best practice is to be using both. So you're keeping your finger on the pulse after you've gone to the doctor, but you're still, consuming both the point-in-time assessment and then, continuing to protect the fortress that is your system or whatever it may be.
Analogy, Martin, love that analogy. It's like a fitness tracker. Daily I can see where I am, where I'm tracking as it relates to my oxygen intake, my blood pressure, all those things. But that doesn't give us the ability to miss our annual physical. So not if we hope to stay healthy and growing over time, thriving over time.
Well, this is it. I mean, at the end of the day, there's only so much kind of like you can do when it comes to the ongoing monitoring in a fashion that's doable, because you can't deep dive into things regularly. It gives you at least a baseline level that you're aware of at the time. It's like, you send in a human pen tester and say to them, right, you're red teaming, try and get through. You're going to use additional tactics that you don't normally use with a standard kind of pen test on a web app or whatever. Your business logic testing is difficult to do without a human. So I do laugh when I hear a lot of, I'm going to be honest, some of my competitors in the CTEM space saying, our AI pen testers will sort it all out. It's like, yeah, but they can't do the business logic. They can't do half the stuff that a human can. And one of the things that I find that also quite funny is the crowdsourced pen testing thing. It's like, we got pen testers, but we don't know who they are. They signed up and we vetted them once.
How do we have any assurance that the documents that are being provided us are appropriate,
exactly
reasonable? Yeah.
I saw an interesting piece of information the other day, like DoorDash, good example, right? DoorDash, there are people in parts of the world with one DoorDash account that's run by about 10 different people over a shift pattern. And none of these people, you don't know, DoorDash doesn't know who any of these people are apart from the main. It's like, you remember the old sort of sharing your account thing, that you'd walk into an organization and you'd suddenly find out that half the IT team were using the same administrative account and sharing an account. So there was no accountability to who was doing what at any one point in time.
Yes.
And then, of course, you got Coinbase, who recently, found out that, bless them, some of their third-party, was it support people, who'd sold off a load of customer information, overselling customer information for extra money. And people say, oh, well, why is that? And it's like, well, these people are living in a part of the world where they don't get paid very well, let's be honest. And someone's turned up and said, I'm going to pay you a lot more in order to, get some of that information. One of the interesting things that I saw with that I really, really liked about NIS2 and DORA, and this is going outside all of our scopes in many respects, or is it kind of staying within our scopes? Constant threat intelligence. Where do you get your threat intelligence? Who do you talk to? We don't like talking as a community, as a general rule, in absolutes about what has happened to our customers or what has happened to us. You get people like Coinbase, who I did like what they did in response. Oh, you want to give us 20 million ransom? Okay, we'll give a 20 million bounty out. And this is exactly what happened to lead up to that. Being very open about how they were breached, what they were breached, was a bit of a breath of fresh air compared to, we take the security of our customer data very seriously, which you usually hear. And it's like, well, you've had a breach. Please don't say that.
Please don't say that. Let's be honest.
Yeah, we screwed up. I'm sorry. This is what happened. It won't happen again. It's probably a far better message to the general public. Maybe not to the people who are about to give you a fine, but it's not them you're necessarily appeasing.
Yeah, and there are a couple definitions that I think level set a lot of this dialogue that we're having. First of all, ISACA. ISACA says governance is a value creation process, hard stop. So governance is all about creating value, and it's a process wherein an organization creates desired outcomes at an optimized risk and cost. So we have to know what it is we want to create, what our goal is. We have to know what risks we face and what costs, be they budgetary, human resources, whatever the case may be. But knowing those three things, we can legitimately create value with any process, including compliance. Second definition from ITIL, where ITIL says partnership is about creating value via shared resources. So once we know how we're going to create value, we can start building partnerships to get that done in an effective way by using resources of other entities. And so as I do think about, particularly, Martin, the relationship between an audit firm like A-LIGN and a GRC platform like Drata, we have an opportunity for the market to choose to partner with us, choose to really create value via our shared resources, if and only if they're prepared to think that way. For organizations that do just want an easy, let me throw my data in and let me hope that this is all that we need to be successful, I don't want to really play any further than that. Not always such an easy road. But for organizations, Jim, that recognize I've got a lot going on, I need to think about my threat surface. I need to think about things that are related to more than just how I run my compliance operations.
Yeah.
For my compliance operations stuff, let me get healthy and let me make that process easy while I do the hard work of really protecting my organization. I think it's those partnerships that really, really shine. Those partnerships that really thrive over time.
How to unpack that one? No, you're absolutely right. I mean, at the end of let's be honest. A lot of CISOs or a lot of C-suites, they just want people to come in and they want to be able to get the job done as cleanly and efficiently as possible. CISOs just want the right partners. They've got millions of different vendors for your endpoint, for this, for that, the other. But when it comes to compliance, you really don't need any of that. You don't need the different suppliers and appease the different organizations that come in. Get the one audit organization, get a good GRC tool, and have some decent assurance of what vulnerabilities you're facing on a day-to-day basis, and you've pretty much won, I would say, a good sort of 40% of the battle. The rest of it is GRC and additional tooling on top. Can I save you, for instance, as a consultant from your, building out your defense in depth and not making it horribly expensive? No, I can't. Because it depends on the assets that you're trying to protect, and if you're a banking institution, your compliance is going to be different, but the principles are still the same.
Principles are the same.
Right. record what you're seeing, do your decent GRC with your, some help from a tool. Your auditor's going to come in, whether you want them to or not. At some point, they're going to come in. And God forbid if you have a breach and you end up with the forensics people in, because they're even more difficult to deal with than a decent auditor. I mean, you can make an audit process pleasant, but you can't make a forensics analysis if you've really, really screwed up particularly pleasant. Whatever happens, you're going to have a bad day.
What's the joke about forensic analysts? So how do you tell the difference between an introverted forensic analyst and an extroverted forensic analyst? The extroverted forensic analyst will stare at your shoes when he's talking to you.
Brilliant. Right. So we've reached the kind of close to the end of the time, but there is some follow-up we're doing. I believe we have security posture assessments, and we have integration guides and all kinds of things. There'll be links down below in the description on how to get those. We'll make sure that the podcast producers and what have you make all of that work. We have a joint webinar. Do we have a date for that yet?
I think it's still, somewhat in the clouds, but it is on course.
Okay, so just watch this space. We'll make sure that there's an announcement that goes out over LinkedIn, and we'll also add to the bottom of the video when we have those days. But we're going to do a good joint webinar between sort of Razorwire, Drata, and A-LIGN to be able to provide you with further content, give you a chance, no doubt, do Q&As at the end. That's usually the fun bit at the end when people start asking questions, because I've seen that be no questions in the past, and then I've seen millions of questions, which we may need to split out into additional podcasts in the future. Because let's face it, the compliance podcast thing, there's only so much you can talk about in at the moment 57 odd minutes. There's so much more you can go into in all three areas, be it the assurance, be it the tooling behind it to record all of this and maintain all of this across multiple standards. And then how do you handle the auditor when he comes in? Do you take them straight out for a beer and say, let's sit down and work through this? A beer usually helps, I'd like to point out, being a Brit. But there's so much content here we could go into. So watch this space. We'll make sure that information gets out across the various different mediums. So check out A-LIGN's website, check out Drata's website, check out our website. And if you have any questions, feel free to DM through to myself, either through YouTube or through one of us, maybe even on LinkedIn, and we'll be more than happy to answer your questions. And if you want further content like this, or you want us to pull the guys together and we'll sit down and go in deeper dive into some of the aspects of what we've spoken about today, then please feel free to get in touch with us, and we've been more than happy, no doubt, to sort of set aside a bit of time to kind of deeper dive into that. Compliance is a big question that a lot of people have a lot of questions and time needed to evaluate and figure out what they're doing. So thank you guys ever so much for attending. No doubt we'll have a number of other podcasts down the line. And thank you all of you out there who regularly watch the channel. We have about 14,000 subscribers at the moment, but 88% of people who do watch us aren't subscribed. We have significant more views. So if you are one of those and you like this kind of content, please subscribe to the channel, press the like button if you like the content. We've got a very high ratio of likes, which I'm very proud of and I'm very happy of. And please click the notification bell so you can be notified of when we produce interesting and more content on all kinds of subject matters related to information security. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Martin.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
In addition, I do have a book recently come out, the Cyber Sentinels Handbook, a primer for information security professionals. Now, this book is very much geared up towards professionals, all levels of their career, be they starters, be they newcomers, be they people who've been in it for a little while and maybe looking for a little bit more direction, albeit the older ones looking to maybe reground themselves in some of the more important aspects of the trade that maybe they've forgotten over time. I've had lots of good feedback from a lot of different readers of a lot of different levels, so please feel free to get yourselves a copy. We've got the e-copy, we've also got the paperback copy, and if you don't want to spend any money, you can go on Kindle Unlimited and read the book for free there as well. So thank you ever so much again. look after yourselves, and we'll be seeing you again soon.